Hi friends, Emily here from Homemade Emily Jane. This video is going to be a little bit different than some of my others, but I really think you'll enjoy it. Today I'm going to talk to you all about how to organize your sewing room closet. If you have a quilting room or a sewing space or a craft room and you have a closet for storage, this video is for you to help you stay as organized as possible. I'm going to start off by sharing some tips and tricks as well as the process I used to design and organize my closet, and then I'll go ahead and show you my closet as well. I have my notes here with me on my computer so I can share with you all of the tips and tricks that I've compiled so that you can be successful in organizing your sewing space. The first thing that I want to talk about when we're discussing your sewing room closet storage is why. Why do we need an organized storage space? You have doors, we can close them, we don't need to be able to see it, right? It's not about like how pretty it looks, but we want our space to be workable. We want to be able to enjoy the creative process and find that one tool that we need right when we need it. So that is why I prefer to have my sewing room organized. I am definitely not the most organized person, but I do find that my creative process thrives when I'm in a clean space and I know where things are. Some people are total creative messes, and I definitely think I lean more towards that side. And some people keep everything neat and orderly all the time. And I'll be completely honest, I'm on the creative mess side. So there is no judgment here, but I want to share some tools and tricks that have worked for me to make my space orderly and so that it works for me. The first thing we want to do when planning to organize our storage space is to measure the space we have and take inventory of all of the items you're hoping to fit inside that space. So for me, I'm talking about my sewing room closet. Measure the width, the height, and the depth of your closet or your storage space so that you know how much space you have to work with. And then take inventory of all of the items you have. Start with the larger items, maybe sewing machines, embroidery units. If you have a fabric cutting machine like AccuQuilt and dies for your AccuQuilt, that would be some large items as well. And then group together similar items. So as you're going through the inventory, fabric is one big group of item that you'll want to group together, and maybe even then group it all together and then split it out, and we'll get more into that later. Some other similar items that you might want to group together might be works in progress or tools, like if you have lots of cutting tools, scissors, rotary cutters might all fit into one category together. Maybe quilt batting scraps or even packaged quilt batting could all be grouped into one item as well. I'll actually post a link in the description below to my blog post that will have all of these tips written out, and it'll include lots more categories for you to choose from as well that might help you as you're going through your organization process. Once you have all of those items grouped together, maybe you want to put them in bins or maybe you're not quite sure yet, but it is important to measure how much space each item takes up so that you can then move on to the next step. But before we start the next step, we want to know how large each item is that we hope to fit into our storage space. And the next step is to create your conceptual plan. Before we even start moving around our stuff, you need to have an idea in mind of where you're going to put your things. And one thing I recommend is to put your heavy, larger items towards the bottom of your storage space, especially if you're using some sort of shelves, which we will discuss in a second. But I personally find it works best for me if I keep the heavier items towards the bottom because I don't have to lift them up and down from high spaces. Another thing we want to discuss is shelving. If you're using a classic closet, maybe it already has one shelf towards the top and a rod for hanging clothes on, which works great if it's a closet used for wardrobe or clothing. But since we're talking about creative craft supplies, you likely need some sort of shelving option. There are a couple different customizable pre-built options that you would install yourself, some from IKEA or the Container Store or maybe even your local home improvement store. What we decided to do for my sewing room, my husband actually ended up building me shelves using wood that we purchased at our local Home Depot. So he was able to use his craftsmanship skills to build my shelves for me. There are lots of different options. I will put some links in the description below that might help you choose which option might be best for you. But now that we already have the measurements done, it'll be easy for you to decide what will work in your space. Once you have your shelving in your closet, you're ready to start putting the items into the places that you had planned back when we were doing our conceptual plan for the closet space. This is the most fun part, but it's also the most work. You'll physically load up your stuff into your closet and maybe rearrange things until you find the perfect fit for what you want. Some things to keep in mind are which tools you use the most often, because you want to be able to access those the most easily. But the tools that you probably don't use as often or might not use very often at all, you could put towards the back or the corners that are a little bit less easily accessible. Once you have finalized where you want everything to go in your closet, you can go ahead and get to work. Start sewing and using that creative energy. But as you take things out, be sure to put them back home when you're done with them. That's the key step in keeping an organized space. And when I say to put them back home, I don't mean you have to do it immediately, but it helps if you do it maybe after every project so that you can start with a clean slate on your next project. And the final thing I want to leave you with is the freedom to adjust your organization as needed. So if you find yourself constantly digging through the back to find something, maybe see if you can move that particular item towards the front and just continue playing around with where you have things until you find the sweet spot for you. Now that we've covered all of these tips and the process I used, it's time for me to show you my closet. You can see here the shelves that my husband built were perfectly customized to my space and work out really well to store some of my larger items on the bottom. So you'll see here my sewing machines, my embroidery unit, some quilt stuff. I have lots of shipping supplies packed in here as well for when I ship out quilt patterns to you all. On that note, I do have a quilt pattern shop. I'll drop a link in the description below in case you're interested. I mail out paper patterns and I also sell digital PDFs for download. You'll see here how I have my fabric organized, and I didn't really get into this too much earlier in the video because I know that there are so many different ways to organize fabric, but I'm gonna share what works for me. I have in my closet my scraps, so anything smaller than a fat quarter, I have sorted by color and put into these drawers. These drawers come in really handy if I'm working on smaller projects, scrappy projects, or if I just want a particular color I can find really quickly. My yardage is actually not stored in my closet. I have a separate bookcase that I store my fabric yardage in for my stash, but I also sort that by color because that's what works for me. I find other people might sort theirs based on fabric designer or manufacturer, and I always say just find what works best for you and stick with it. Some other things I have in my closet that are less accessible are my leftover quilt batting scraps or even a package of new quilt batting or two. Back in those back corners, I also have some works in progress that I squeeze back there as well. And then some items for other crafts that I enjoy as well. I have a whole tote full of yarn for when I feel like crocheting or knitting. And so I encourage you to also use your space in the way that best suits you. Thanks so much for watching this video about how I organized my closet space in my sewing room. I hope you gathered a tip or trick or two to help you have a more organized space to let your creative process flow. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and drop a comment below to let me know how you're organizing your fabric as well.